And I think there's a lot of shame surrounding bodies. There's a lot of shame surrounding sexual expression that is attached to everyone. Like, you know, even if you are raped, the shame is yours and not the rapists.
Welcome to the LMF Network podcast. My name is Sonia Barlow, the host, CEO and founder. This podcast is all about building our careers and confidence with a mission to build the careers and confidence of 25,000 people by 2025 through mentoring, masterclasses, and meaningful connections. For us, this podcast is about sharing stories, highlighting incredible figures, learning about their career journeys, how they overcome failure, rejection, and imposter syndrome, what we can do to build our confidence, be our biggest cheerleaders, and really define as well as achieve our version of success.
And today we're talking all things PhD, pole dancing, and public shaming. Carolina, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to.
You're not as excited as I am. I've been fangirling you for so long, and I remember following you online when I myself was thinking of doing a PhD. And I realized that when I started looking into doing a PhD, there wasn't a lot of content out there for the process, how it actually works, how much stress actually goes into it, the lifelong kind of journey. So on that note, it would be great if you could give us an introduction to your professional career and tell us all what you are studying.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Carolina Ares. So I already finished my PhD. Thank God. I was so over it. It's like having a baby, but for like 4 years. So yeah, I call myself a pole dancing academic. So I'm a researcher. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. My title is very long. It's basically Innovation Fellow at the Center for Digital Citizens at Northumbria University. But really, I'm a postdoctoral researcher. So writing academic papers, collecting data, speaking to people, and writing that up is my job. And then I'm also a pole instructor. I used to teach quite regularly at Aquila Pole Studio in Brixton in London, but now I mainly teach workshops just because the research side of things is taking over. And on top of that, I'm also an online content creator, which is something that I've had to do throughout my life, mainly to promote my writing initially when I was just a blogger, and then to promote my pole dancing classes when I became an instructor. So yeah, you can find me pretty much all over the internet at Blogger on Pole. Blogger on Pole is my handle. My blog is bloggeronpole.com. Just a trigger warning, there's going to be a lot of nudity. So I've been told that I'm one of the trickiest people to stalk online if you're in the office. So maybe just don't open it in the office. Depending on the office, maybe you have a really nice office. That's fine with us.
Who is opening it in the office?
A lot of people, apparently. I don't know.
I mean, that's wild, but I can also see how the office, like, antivirus and algorithms would just go ballistic.
Not really for my blog, I would say. But I think, like,
for your content online. Not that your content is revealing, but obviously being a woman, doing what you're doing in public, you know, it's a big no. Don't put your nipples out on display.
Yeah, no nipples on display, which I still, unfortunately, can't put on display. Because if I do put them on display, then that means that my content gets deleted, like, straight away. So, but, I mean, I do provocative moves in a tiny bikini, I guess, because pole dancing is an art and a sport that comes from stripping. So there is associated nudity to it. But yeah, so I guess for some employers, it might be weird that some people are looking at
yeah, but I saw a video of yours a couple of months ago that you posted where I think your dad was just there and you were just dancing, and I just thought that was the most interesting concept because obviously they're immune to it, or at least I like to think that they don't sexualize you.
Oh no, well, that's the main thing. Like, I think that video was one of the few videos that on my Instagram got quite a lot of backlash, because my backlash is usually on TikTok. It's creeps that are saying, you know, that my morals are non-existent, or like some other people saying that my content is not appropriate for children, which is fair enough. But then again, why are children looking at my content? But on Instagram, which is generally a really nice community for me, I actually got quite a lot of backlash from people, and mainly women, saying this is gross. Like, why would you do that in front of your dad and stuff like that? And I think that says a lot about people's relationship with their parents. Like, maybe they're assuming that their parents would sexualize them, but my parents do not.
And if that's how you think, you definitely should go and get that help.
Yeah, it's a bit creepy. And on top of that, like my parents are so over it. Like my parents are like, oh my God, she's talking about pole again. Stop. Like my parents came to support me at a competition where I was twerking on stage and taking my bra off. And like, obviously it's weird to them, but at the same time, they appreciate that it's an impressive thing to do, that it's hard physically, and that it's good for my mental health. So when they see me train, they're kind of impressed. And it's quite funny because like sometimes I train at home in Italy where my dad has helped me set up my pole, and I live next to my parents when I'm in Italy. And sometimes I like scream because I got to move, and my dad is like, oh my God, did you fall? Do you need help? And I was like, no, I'm just excited. So like it's nice. Like
So they're supportive.
They're really supportive.
And that itself plays a level of privilege. Not everyone's parents are that supportive. And I think that's also what you're touching on is, yes, we can get onto your pole dancing and you've obviously established yourself in the arts. And I love the fact you call it art. It's a physical art movement. It takes a lot of stress. It takes a lot of strength. You've clearly worked your way up, right? What you're doing, most people can't do. That means that you're bloody resilient. It means that your discipline is intact. And it's great that your parents are supporting you. But all of that is also earned privilege that you've kind of been working at and working towards. Let's take it back a notch. And you said that you're also a doctor whilst you're a pole dancer. Now, it's one thing to get backlash from your family, people online, but what about people that used to work with, like your work colleagues? Because those are your sense of community. Those are your friends that you create. That's the network. How did, what were some of the comments that you had?
So that's a really interesting question because I feel like there have been so many faces towards people's reaction to my pole dancing, because I didn't start it when I was here in the UK, because I moved to the UK when I was 18 to do my BA in journalism. Then I ended up working in PR, got massively burnt out, retrained as an academic through a master's in criminology. My master's I did in Australia, so I did it in Sydney, not here, because I just needed to get out. Like I needed to find somewhere else. I applied to one university, the University of Sydney, because I was like, if I get in, it means that I have to go. And I got in, so I went there. And I had this whole idea that, I was going to be like the self-made entrepreneur, living the surfer life, selling panini on Bondi Beach with a panini truck. Didn't work like that. I was massively alone. I didn't know anybody.
And what year was this, sorry?
So this was in 2016.
Okay.
So quite a while ago. And then what happened was that pole dancing is massively mainstream in Australia.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that either.
It's very famous in Australia, to the point where some pole dancers are like celebrities within the country. And on top of that, it's just I think because it's a summary culture and they're very open-minded for certain things, not for everything else. It like pole has just become massive. Like it's a massive show in Australia. Like Miss Pole Dance Australia, a competition, is always like booked up in a theatre in the centre of Sydney.
Oh, cool.
So it's really huge over there. And there are so many schools, like there are so many pole studios where you could learn. And there was one right next to my university, and a girl I'd met over there was like, my friend is doing a showcase there. Do you want to go see it? And then maybe we can try a class. So we did. And I was hooked straight away. But for me, it wasn't like, oh, I started this thing and then all of a sudden my friends and colleagues are judging me because I was on the other side of the world and nobody knew me. So this is why I probably stuck with it, because I'm one of those people that if I'm not good at something, I just give up. And with pole, you start and you're not good. Like, I don't know anybody who starts and is amazing, because it's a really hard thing to do. And I think like the associated nakedness and the associated sexiness make it even harder to feel good about it, because you're kind of like, well, I'm clearly meant to be sexy and I'm really not. But actually, I started really uncritically, and I was just very lonely and I just wanted to do something. And because I used to do artistic gymnastics as a child, I liked the danger of being upside down. So to me, that's all that mattered. And I knew that I wasn't going to be good. And I decided to post about it straight away on my social media.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because it was a way to keep in touch with friends. Like, it was like my best friends were here. So I was kind of like, well, I'm obviously I'm telling them about it, but also a way for people to kind of keep in touch with me and to see what I'm doing is to see it on my social media. So I started posting it straight away. And it's quite funny because looking back, like friends of friends were saying, like, have you seen like what Carolina is doing? She's not very good at it, is she? and like I wasn't.
But
like,
I just want to jump in here and say that everyone feels like they have an opinion on something that they've never tried doing themselves.
Yep.
A really good example is I'll get messages being like, that podcast was really good, but you could have done this.
Yeah.
I'm like, but do you know how hard it is actually to sit here and have a conversation with someone, to have the energy to want to have the discussion? Or when you're delivering presentations or when you're doing public speaking, feedback is good. But like when people are coming from a place of malice or like constructively criticizing you, but it's not constructive. Oh, you could have done that better. That would have been better. I was like, but I've done this 100 times. Like, I know it's not perfect, but I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I'm like, why don't you do it then?
Yeah.
Like, this could be your podcast. And I think, like, going back to my PhD, actually, because my PhD was on online abuse and trolling and stuff, there's a form of trolling which is called concern trolling. And it's basically people that sound like they're trying to help you, but actually they're just undermining you by saying, oh, this thing, like, actually, have you considered this? Like, I'm a bit concerned that you haven't done that and stuff like that. And it's a technique to undermine what you're doing.
Thank God I've had so many people's pictures in my head just come up when you just said that, to be like, were you really my friend or were you just trolling me? And actually, a lot of toxic relationships come as a result of that, because you think, and I'm genuinely thinking of people when I'm saying this, especially at university, when it's a time where you're reforming yourself, you're figuring out your identity, you're trying to figure it out. A lot of our listeners are young professionals. They're going to be trying to people please these people because they think that it's coming from a place of love or a place of, oh, well, did you think about doing this? Like, that was good, but this could be better, like a backhanded compliment. But actually, they're just trolling you. They don't really... They're fake.
Yeah, it's almost like a form of negging. I don't know. It's very strange. Like, there are some people that are actually giving you constructive criticism, but I feel that the people who would do that in a DM, like not in a comment. You know what I mean? And I feel if you're doing it in a comment, it just feels like you want to show people that you know about that and that person is not doing enough. So, and it's the same with Paul. Like, I find it so interesting that, like, sometimes on my TikTok, when something goes viral, there's always, like, I don't know, some dude with a picture of a dog in his profile, or like a woman who only has videos of herself cleaning that is like, oh yeah, that doesn't look really smooth. And I'm like, great, you do it then. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, I'm very self-critical when it comes to my pole dancing. Mm-hmm. I'm way more critical about my pole dancing than about my academic work. And that's probably because I love it so much.
Because you're passionate, you can see it when you speak. So tell me, what made you, I understand the fact that you just kind of weren't in your career anymore and that you wanted to move into academia. But as somebody who wants to go into academia, it takes a certain type of person to be in academia. Mm-hmm. I've applied for a PhD twice now. Mm-hmm. Actually, the day that I got rejected from a PhD was the day that I got the gig at the BBC. Oh, so wow. I literally went from doctor to, I went from doctor to presenter in like 3 hours. Mm-hmm. Like, my life completely turned. I wanted to do a PhD because I was super serious about a topic, because I wanted the doctor title. And also because eventually I want to do lecturing. Mm-hmm. I want to do academia. But doing a PhD itself, there's a lot of barriers to access. Money, wealth, finances, network, connections, researchability. But as an example, I'm going back to the point, I wanted to do it because I want to eventually be a lecturer. Mm-hmm. And it turns out, especially in the UK, a lot of the roles that are lecturing roles, you can only do if you have a master's or a PhD, which I think personally leaves a large pool of individuals that are super talented and capable out of the mix.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's really interesting because the fact that you have a PhD doesn't make you a good lecturer. Like, a lot of people are great at studying, but they're not good at teaching. And what's really interesting to me is that actually, when you have to teach in high school, for instance, you have to go through so many checks and you have to make sure that you're super, super good and whatever. And actually, you will only realize when you become a PhD student, a lot of your former lecturers at university are PhD students that have been thrown into the mix and that either have a scholarship and therefore as part of their scholarship they're expected to teach, or they're supporting themselves through casual work, which is visiting lecturing. And it's mind-blowing because when I started, I was like, okay, so I need to teach. I want to be as prepared as possible. And everyone was like, oh yeah, just take like this evening class to learn how to teach. And they teach you about the theories of teaching, but not the practicalities of what happens and what you have to do if a student is difficult or if you can't control the class. None of that goes into the mix. So a lot of the people...
But those are the life skills you need.
And nobody
But I
teaches them to you.
so listen, I love university. I went to university myself and I do a lot of visiting lecturing at universities. I run mentoring programs with universities. But one of I think a gap that universities have, and I'm saying this publicly now, is the fact they don't actually teach life skills or professional skills. They don't teach you how to network, how to write emails, how to manage conflict, how to look after yourself in the time of like burnout, which you've already touched on, how to finesse your way in the system. They teach you theory. Like theoretically, I know how to manage 300 people in a HR unit. Yeah. Practically, no, you never told me any time one-to-ones with each of those people once a week, do, appraisals, manage conflict, make sure that everyone's like working out on time. It's vastly different.
Well, I think I am actually not a huge fan of practical degrees because I feel like practical degrees are a huge scam. And I say this as someone who has taught in practical degrees.
What is a practical degree?
As in like a course that prepares you for a profession at university. So let's say journalism or management or stuff like that. Because I think like a lot of those courses are great at teaching you the theory around that, which is great. It needs to happen. But actually what you're paying for is the connection with business and the professions and the piece of paper. And it's annoying because then, for instance, in journalism, I would have never been able to be a journalist had I not done that degree because as a foreigner, I didn't have the contacts within the industry or the skills. But if you are from here, actually, you might spend less money and learn the life skills you need faster with an unpaid internship of a few weeks instead of having to pay $9,000 a year.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I mean, like the way I turned my degree around in a way that was really helpful was actually focusing more on the theory to then become an academic. But
did you always know, Suri, that you wanted to be an academic of some kind?
No, I didn't. So I knew I wanted to do criminology as a teen and I knew that I wanted to study in the UK. But then when it came to actually applying, I was too afraid that criminology was going to be conceptually too difficult to do in a second language. So I did journalism because there was a form of investigation involved. And then by the second year, I was like, actually, I'm not liking this at all, but I finished it. And so I just became more academic about the topics that I was choosing. But going back to the lacking life skills taught in academia, like when I did my PhD, at some point I threw a massive tantrum at my supervisors because, as you said, you have to be really conscious that when you do a PhD, there are barriers that you will face. And I think there are, class barriers, gender barriers, racial barriers, all sorts of things. And personally, I had a fee waiver, so I didn't have to pay tuition fees, but I didn't have a scholarship. So I needed to support myself to pay the bills.
And how did you obtain a fee waiver?
Just upon application.
Oh,
pretty
okay.
much. So it was really annoying because I applied to quite a few PhD programs and I got into all of them, but one of them wouldn't offer me a scholarship. Another one did offer me a scholarship. And then by the time I sent them my marks, which were the marks they requested and they were distinctions and whatever, because they came from Australia, so they came a bit later, they were like, oh yeah, we don't have a scholarship for you anymore.
Oh no.
So if you want, you can pay and start. And I was like, well, I don't have $5,000 a year, so no. So then as a backup, I went back to my original institution where I did my BA, City University. And thanks to my former thesis supervisor, she put me in touch with the criminology department. And he was the guy that then became my supervisor, the professor that became my supervisor, was like, look, our department is not offering scholarships anymore, but we have a fee waiver and you qualify for it. So
Oh my God, I went to Cass Business School, now Bayes Business School, so City University.
Small world.
When did you go to university?
So my BA was 2011 to 2014, and my PhD.
We were literally at uni at the same time.
Oh my God! Really?
Stop.
Which halls of residence were you in?
No,
Were
I
you
did.
in
I
the
wasn't
halls?
allowed to live out. No.
Okay.
I come from a brown family. I was allowed to go to uni if anything was encouraged, but my first 2 years I wasn't allowed to live out. I use the word allowed because it was just, my parents were like, yeah, we're not really into living out right now. But all my siblings lived out.
Okay,
I just want to make that really clear.
Yeah.
That the eldest has to suffer. But we literally, my point being is, the world is so small. We probably have crossed paths so many times.
I'm pretty sure.
Like those were the years I was there. I was there 2011 to 2015.
Oh wow! So did you do like a year of?
I did a year in Italy.
Oh nice! Where
Actually,
did you do
in
it?
Rome.
Oh nice. My mom's from Rome.
Oh my God. Imagine I've just
Small
crossed
world.
paths with your family like so many times
I
as
know,
well.
it's so weird. Which course did you do at City?
So I did business, which was a BSc undergrad then it was Cass Business School, now it's Bayes Business School. But we studied at the City University campus.
Oh,
so not the
okay.
Moorgate campus.
Not the fancy one.
Not the fancy one, even though that's what I was told where we were going to study. And now I do visiting lecturing at university, and I run their digital professional mentoring program twice a year.
Nice.
So I take 40 students after hours over either 4 weeks or 3 months and teach them the life skills and the professional skills you need in the workplace. And last year we had 40 students. They increased their confidence by 80% and 30% of them landed full-time job roles.
Oh, that's so cool. That's
And just
amazing.
actually yesterday, I was there at City doing a 3-hour lecture.
That's, I don't know, it's so random, such a small world. I'm sure we've probably crossed paths, like at least at the freshers events, if you were there. I don't know if you were there, but definitely in the corridors.
Definitely in the cafeteria.
Yeah. But yeah, like it was so interesting to me, even when I did the PhD, because initially I was all about, doing my research, doing the things and whatever. And that was good. And I needed to do it. But then when lockdown came, I started wanting to submit papers to journals, because a big thing in getting a job as a postdoc or as an academic and a lecturer is publishing. Like you need to have shown that you've published relevant papers. And I was submitting papers and getting rejected left, right, and center with horrible reviews. And I was like, what in the hell is going on? So I asked my ex at the time, he was an older academic, to read my papers. And he was like, yeah, you don't have a line of argument. Your paper is all over the place. Like you're saying a lot of nice things, but they don't make sense together. Like there's no direction here. So I just threw a massive tantrum with my supervisors, because I was like, how is it that my partner is helping me more than you are? Like you're literally my supervisors. You're nitpicking. You're telling me you don't like a paragraph, you don't like a sentence in my thesis, which I had pretty much finished by the second year of my PhD. The third year was all about editing, and they were nitpicking, and I was like, I just want to be done, because not having the PhD prevents me from getting a stable full-time job. And this very precarious living condition is really affecting my mental health. Meanwhile, you're telling me you don't like a paragraph. And all the papers that I'm trying to submit are getting rejected. You're not teaching me the skills that I need. And I think by the last year, bless them, they must have really hated me, because I was really pushing them. But it was actually helpful, because it was thanks to the papers I published that I got my job, and that I was able to blend my two careers as a pole dancer and as an academic. But if I hadn't, thrown a tantrum back then, it wouldn't have happened. And this is why it's so weird to me that there's this split between the theoretical life and the practical life in academia, when really you need both.
Just honestly, I'm just taking a moment because I just think that's a fantastic story. And I love the way that in the end, it's all kind of intertwined and it's what you are passionate about. But what I'm also hearing you say, and I think these are really important life skills for anyone and everyone listening, is that you were persistent, that you were able to identify gaps yourself and kind of do something about them. You didn't just wait around to be handed something on the plate. You went and you started to grab it. And when you weren't being listened to, you took, you know, a form of means into your own hands. And I think sometimes, I'm going to play devil's advocate, I think right now, professionals are missing that a little bit.
I mean, I think what's really tricky is that academia and the professional world don't really communicate with each other. It's very strange. And I think I've benefited from doing my BA, thinking I was done with academia and going into
the real world. Which is what I say to individuals. So just yesterday, as an example, students were saying, should we go do a master's? And I was like, no. And I was like, obviously universities don't want to hear me say this. I'm not saying don't do a master's eventually. I'm saying don't do a master's for the sake of doing it because you don't know what else to do. Do a master's if, yes, you need to stay in the country longer to find a job. Absolutely. Master's comes with its own privilege, and people that need sponsorship or visas, that's a good route to level up whilst you're still on the hunt. Do a master's if you are super secure in what it is you want to do, but don't do a master's because I don't know what else to do and I want to specialize. How do you know what you want to specialize in? Go and work, go and do skill swapping, go and do internships, volunteer your time. Like, humble yourself, go and work at Tesco's whilst you're doing something, you know, on the side that you enjoy. Go and freelance. But I talk to a lot of young professionals right now who are scared, who fear failure, who are not ready to be resilient. And yet they want to start businesses. And yet they want to be entrepreneurs. And I'm like, do you not understand that it's hard being an entrepreneur? It's hard starting a business. It's hard freelancing. You have to constantly pitch yourself. You have to face rejections. You have to, you know, be your biggest cheerleader, which clearly you're doing. You have to really grab life itself. So entrepreneurship is not the easy route out. If anything, entrepreneurship is probably the harder route out. The easier route, or the most practical route, is to go and do a bunch of things within 12 months, see what you enjoy, see what you don't enjoy, and then build a career that you want. And I always say your job is for today, your career is for tomorrow. What I mean by that is until you have real responsibilities, you don't have a career, you just have jobs that are making you the money.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's like when you go to university, you're so young. Like the reason why I went to university as young as I was, so just straight out of high school, was that it was the last year that you could pay 3K a year in the UK. Because otherwise I would have liked to, I don't think I was fearless enough at the time to go off traveling by myself, but I would have definitely liked to maybe come here and work for a year before going to uni. But I couldn't do it because otherwise I would have had to pay a lot more. So, but when I teach undergrads, now my job is research only, but when I used to teach undergrads, it was really interesting to me that you could tell that they picked the degree mainly criminology because it sounded interesting, but not because they had like a life goal with it. And I think when you're 18, you're so young to choose where you're going.
Absolutely.
And that first degree is actually quite helpful to understand what you like and what you don't like, and to get like a bit of a cultural background around something. But then, as you said, it's better to go off and work and make up your mind about what you like and what you don't like in the real world instead of going straight to academia, which is why when I was doing my PhD, and a lot of people will hate me for saying this, but I stopped hanging out with other PhDs quite quickly because I found that quite a lot of them, not all of them, but quite a lot of them had only done academia, had done like a BA, a master's, and a PhD. And so they were always complaining about how hard working in academia was and how hard writing a chapter was and whatever. And, you know, let me tell you, academia is hard. It's a very privileged place. Not everybody is super friendly. It's a very individualistic space. So working in academia is 100% challenging, and it's getting more precarious by the day, particularly for younger generations. But I got massively burnt out in PR. Like I remember, you know, the hours of unpaid overtime, the expectation that you're always happy and sociable even when you're struggling, the expectation that you have to go out and get drunk with your colleagues because if you don't do that, you're not a team player. But
that's the corporate world, and I absolutely hate it. I'm not a drinker. I don't want to do that. But I also have a life. I don't want to stay after 7, after 6. You know, a big thing that I say to the corporate individuals, and hopefully people are listening, is if you are doing team bonding, do them during work hours. I'm not trying to meet my team after work hours.
No.
If
People
you want
lives.
They have lives. If you want us to mingle, buy us breakfast. Not everything is around alcohol. And don't make it in places where you feel uncomfortable. Like, I might not be drinking, but I don't want to sit in a pub. It smells. It just wasn't for me, you know? But you miss out on conversations. You miss out on promotions. You miss out on the networks that people are building because you're not around. Yeah. And then you get called an anti-team player. And it's like, well, you're not a team player if you're not adjusting or adapting.
And also, like, if you're not a team player outside of working hours, that's your business. You have to be a team player within work. You can't expect people to spend their lives outside of work doing things related to work. Like, you know, people might not be able to stay late for so many reasons. They might be single parents. Their mental health might not be great. They might have disabilities or, like, you know, conditions that don't allow them to be out of home for too many hours.
Or they might just be commuting. Like, I remember when I used to commute to the office, one of my first jobs, it would take me like 90 minutes driving.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't stay because then I get in motorway traffic. And there's so many times where because I had to stay or I was forced to stay, or they give you the look, right? And I'm like, but I got here an hour earlier than everyone. No, but you have to leave at 5.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd get stuck for 3 hours, and it's like, it's cool. You live 10 minutes down the road, but you have to do, yeah, like you said, there's so many reasons. And for some reason, we stop humanizing people.
Yeah, we do. And it was really disheartening because I was going through a really hard time at the time. I had just gotten out of an abusive relationship. So every time I drank, I would get flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't pretty. So I would look like an absolute, you know, like mess. And but to these people, I was still not a team player. And it was interesting because also I was hired because I was a blogger and because of the contacts I had within the journalism industry. But I would get the side eye or the eye roll if I had to leave on time. So at 6 to go to a blogger event that I would then use for work anyway. So it was really, really hard to work in that industry. So when people in academia are like, oh, and then I have to write this chapter and it's hard. I'm like, yeah, it's hard, but like maybe you haven't lived outside of that. So I think it's important to get a bit of a perspective on everything. Because then also, if you've never worked as an academic, and then some of these people go out to write papers about precarity of work or whatever, and then they don't really have the empathy or the knowledge to know what those workers are actually going through.
But it's the same as when I studied business and we used to have academics or lecturers that used to come in and just be pure academics and they're doing PhD papers. Even back then I was like, well, hold on, I work part-time in retail. I know that what you're teaching me about customer service is not practical.
Yeah.
I know that conflict resolution in the book does not include swear words, and it does not include crying, and it does not include, you know, getting management involved, and it does not include having to like show up with a smile, and it does not include all the nonsense that happens behind the scenes because you have only learned about it on paper. But in real life, these are the practical steps you take. A really good example being networking. Mm-hmm. Listen, the amount of questions I get around networking. Oh, but our lecturer said, an academic said, XYZ said, like networking is these 7 steps. No, networking is, we've never heard of that. We've never heard of the practical sense of networking. Like, you're telling them to network. And today someone asked me, but where do you find places to network? I'm like, how is that not what you're being taught? They're like, no, we've never been taught that. We've just been told networking is important, but we don't know the practicality of it.
Yeah, but I've experienced that in media courses where, you know, even when I was doing my BA, people would teach us like some tech stuff out of a book, like, and they themselves didn't know it, or and like this is why I have a pet peeve about practical courses. Not all of them, and some of them are really, really good. Like, for instance, my former course at City Journalism, they have some, like, you know, incredible lecturers coming out of it, and like the relationship with the professions is quite good, so you get to experience things the way it would happen. But like sometimes these practical courses are an excuse for certain professionals who have exited their profession to beef up their pensions. So there are people that actually haven't worked in the field in years. And I think particularly with how fast-paced society is becoming, with the adoption of technology in so many industries, then it's quite interesting to see these people that are actual dinosaurs trying to teach young people things. So that's why I'm like, sometimes it's more helpful to do a theoretical degree where you're learning about history or politics or political science or, you know, humanities and whatever, and then actually do an internship if you can afford it, or like work like part-time somewhere, because then you get the practical skills that are needed. Because sometimes, you know, when you get a practical degree, you feel like you don't have enough in either sense. You don't have enough of practical skills because it's still a degree, so they can't throw you into the deep end like they would at work. But also you don't have enough theoretical skills because you're focusing on the practical the theoretical interpretation and teaching of a practical thing instead of the theories that are necessary.
I completely understand. One thing I'm really picking up as you converse is you're quite confident in sharing your opinion.
I mean, this will get me cancelled maybe by academics, but I don't know.
I don't think it will. I'm a big believer of sharing what you think. I think I'm very attracted to individuals who say what they want with evidence. You know, like you've backed it up with examples. You know what the reason as to why you're saying it. It's so that you can better the system. You're not just saying it because you're like, here's a platform, I'm just going to kind of thrash everyone. And that's not the point. You've shared the good, the bad, and the improvement, basically, which is coming across. But I can also imagine that lends itself to your public shaming.
I mean, I've never so much been publicly shamed for my ideas yet, mainly being publicly shamed because my ass is on the internet.
But how do you move past it? How do you build that resilience, that like, how do you build the armor around yourself? Because I know recently, as I've been following you, you know, you've been like shadow banned and you've been blocked, and accounts, you know, companies have taken you off their accounts as an example, which for me makes no sense because there's actually bad things happening in the world. And we're not going to talk about, you know, people or examples that are being amplified, and they're okay being amplified. But here you are doing something artistic, something creative, something poetic, something academic, something in your like your life, you know, your livelihood, what fundamentally makes you income. And you're being cancelled for it or publicly shamed for it. Or the way that especially tech organizations are creating these like social platforms, I don't think they're really creating them with, how do I say this in a way that makes sense? You know, it seems like they're amplifying one kind of particular person, voice, or demographic, and oppressing the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, you know, what's really strange is that people have been assuming that because something is new and made with tech, it's going to be great and more equal than what was before. But I mean, who makes the tech?
Absolutely.
It's the same people as before.
And they're using the same databases as before. So when you think about AI is changing everything. Well, no, let's talk about recruitment. AI will have the biases because the data beforehand that's used to create these tools, these models, have the biases innately within them.
Not even just the tools, not even just the data, even the people who makes that, who make that type of tool and that type of process. So, you know, it's difficult for me to say that I've been like cancelled more than other people, because I haven't. Like, what I do comes with massive privilege, because by being an academic and by being a content moderation expert with a PhD who also happens to experience censorship, I'm actually quite lucky, because I get platforms like these where I get to talk about it. But there is a variety of users out there who get actually cancelled, and not cancelled in the way of criticized, but actually cancelled, removed, wiped from the face of the internet. And nobody is out there to help them, because it's not an image problem for platforms to get rid of them.
Absolutely.
So, and that's because of the biases that existed offline that have been built into technology. So, the reason why particularly women and LGBTQ plus people's bodies are removed from the internet is because of, so far, largely an American law. So there's this law called FOSTA-SESTA, which is an exception to Section 230 of the US Telecommunications Act. So according to this section, if you are a social media platform and something bad happens on your platform, like an awful thing is posted on your platform, let's say like a video from a mass shooting, Mark Zuckerberg is not going to get done for it because he is a utility, an intermediary. Like Facebook, Meta, they are a utility and an intermediary. They're not promoting that as in endorsing it. They're just providing a platform to put it out there. Mm-hmm. So it's still like that, but for one piece of content, one type of content, which is content that facilitates sex trafficking, which sounds like a great thing. But what this FOSTA-SESTA exception to this law has done is that it lumps sex trafficking, which is a horrible crime, with sex work, which is a job that people do consensually. And then because they're trying to detect these two things, there's been a slippery slope in trying to detect anything that might remotely be sensual or depicting a body. And obviously, if you get a largely male workforce trying to detect sexual activity, they're going to identify sexual activity with women's bodies.
Yes.
To the point where if someone has on their profile that they're a sex worker, so many of my research participants have been sharing normal life stuff, like going out or like going out with their family and stuff.
Like the fit you're wearing or like, you know, a
going
twirl with
food.
something. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's always perceived as sexual activity. And similarly, nudity is always blended with sexual activity, whether you're having sex or not. And sometimes I actively sexualize myself because I perform in a sexy way, but sometimes I'm just doing a sweaty trick. And it's really weird that some algorithm made by some dude who's a bit too horny thinks that I'm having sex.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and I appreciate that we probably don't have the time, but I'd like to get you on just to unpack that itself. But we've used the word sexy a few times. What does it mean to be sexy? I have myself quite I don't necessarily have a relationship with the word sexy. Mm-hmm. I'm not really for it. I'm not down for it. Mm-hmm. Maybe because I don't know if I am or if I'm construed as sexy. It's not necessarily something that I thrive to be or strive to be. Mm-hmm. Maybe because maybe a lot of it is your context or your culture, or the way you've grown up. But, you know, I'd rather be that or that or that than sexy. But maybe it's because I don't really understand what sexy is. Like, I think people who are confident are sexy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And you know what? Like, I spent quite a lot of my life just pretty much trying to be separate from my body. Mm-hmm. So precisely because I wanted to be seen as everything but sexy. I wanted to be seen as someone with an opinion, someone with skills, someone who was competent.
Because it feels like you can't intersect that. It feels like they're mutually exclusive. Like, if you are sexy, you are just sexy. You can't, you know, it feels like you can't be sexy and smart. You can't be sexy and beautiful. You can't be sexy and academic. You can't be sexy and a presenter, an entrepreneur, an author. Like, it feels like if you're sexy, then you are
being undermined. Yeah.
Yeah, like you are, you know, yes, sex is a compliment. But I think the way that people use the word sexy, there's tones of like being undermined and being, I think there's a rudeness to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And having recently watched the Pamela Anderson documentary, I have a lot of opinions about it because she was so sexy. She was completely erased as a human being. Like, her humanity was just completely forgotten. So she was certainly someone that was fair game. And I think that's the culture that we've been brought up in. Some people are even more fetishized than others, maybe because of their ethnic background or because of their job or because of whatever that it, you know, their physical characteristics. So for ages, I wanted to be everything but sexy. Like, I grew up as a metalhead wearing big band t-shirts to hide my body. When I moved here, there was this massive disconnect between my attempts to date people and people just trying to undress me with their eyes. Like I could be talking to them about quantum physics, but all they cared about was that I was young, I was carefree, I was Italian, I looked a bit different, so I was someone to
Exotic.
Yeah. Someone,
Exotic
I hate
is
that
the
word.
The word. Someone called me exotic a few years ago, and I didn't know how to act or react because I was like, they were like, oh, you're so exotic. And then I started speaking, and they were like, you're exotic and you're British. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know if I should like say thank you, or if I should like slap you, or if I should walk away. Like I found it really weird. What does that even mean? And it also sounds like to me, you know, and we're touching on this, like the sexualization of women, particularly because, I mean, we can relate to those concepts. That's different to sex appeal, which is different to being sexy, which is different to feeling sexy and then being kind of notified or being pinpointed as sexy. And then what happens in society, and I think as a consumer problem, I think we allow it to happen, is then we benchmark sexiness with this person, this person, this person. So if you don't look or feel like this person, then you're not sexy.
Yeah, and I think that's where pole dancing became really, really helpful for me because, as I said, like I spent all of this time trying to escape my body, and then as someone coming from the experiences of an abusive relationship and sexual assault, like for me, I just felt like my body was the cause, you know, like it was this wild thing that was creating problems. And then with pole, I think because I started because I wanted to stay afloat and I needed to find something different to do. I didn't attach the sexy label to what I was doing. I was just trying to survive, essentially. So that allowed me to find my own sexy in a way that feels comfortable for me. So I feel the sexiest when I dance to rock and metal, which is my favorite type of music. And I get to feel really badass and powerful while also being a bit naked. And I'm in control of what I'm doing. People are watching. People might be feeling some type of way about what I do. I don't care, but I feel comfortable and powerful in what I'm doing. And I think it's actually really important for me now to express myself sexually. And looking back, it was important for me then because I went through a long period of celibacy when I was recovering from my abusive relationship because I didn't want to have sex with people because I was kind of like scarred by it. And you know, sex is a normal, natural thing in life that we're trying to ostracize, but actually, hopefully we all have it and we have a good time with it. And not being able to express myself sexually in the bedroom with someone was hard. So being able to express myself sexually through pole was helpful and healing. And it helped me find a way to like myself that wasn't attached to the label of sexiness that people would put on me in the bedroom or to some people's expectation of what sexy was like. I could always do it on my own terms and in my own way, even if at the time I wasn't particularly fit. I was very average in terms of build. I didn't look like a model or like a superstar or whatever, but I felt confident with what I was doing.
You felt good.
I felt good. And I think this is what sexy means to me, is feeling good and comfortable with my sexual expression, whatever that might be. And that has no race, no size, no gender, because it's different for everyone. And I think that's where it's really important to not hide sexual expression, because sexual expression has a power to relieve and to essentially release you from shame. And I think there's a lot of shame surrounding bodies. There's a lot of shame surrounding sexual expression that is attached to everyone. Like, you know, even if you are raped, the shame is yours and not the rapists. Or if you are gender non-conforming, or if you're not straight-sized or whatever, you should be ashamed of showing yourself because you're not what people want to see.
So it's about taking control and owning whatever and whoever version of yourself you are.
Yeah.
And evolving.
Yeah, you're not always going to be the same. And something that is really powerful in pole that I love seeing is seeing people that have had children and whose body has changed, or people who have maybe suffered an illness, or people that have for whatever reason, had to lose maybe even part of their body, like there are so many amputees doing pole, reclaim that power and reclaim that body, and like appreciate that their bodies are changing, but that their bodies are getting them through their lives. And that's so important. And yeah, like I myself know that I don't want children, but it's beautiful to see people still express themselves that way in a different body, even if it's still their body.
Yeah.
And I feel like, all like everything that we've grown up with has been really damaging because we've only been shown a body type. And this is where social media censorship pisses me off even more, because social media has allowed us to see that there are different bodies, that there are different people doing different things, that you don't all have to look the same to do things.
And I'm glad that you've shared that message. And I think we'll definitely have to get you on just to touch on that, because we can unlock that throughout. And I have so many questions for you myself. So I'm going to note them down and, send them your way, but get you on for another time. But Carolina, thank you so much. I mean, we have covered everything from sex appeal to what is sexy, how to get into PhD, what is academia, the problems that suffice within our education system, all the way to practical life tips, how to reclaim your body, how to take control of yourself, and how to build that confidence. I mean, I feel like we've covered so much that I'm going to have to snip this up into different kind of chunks just to put it out. But Carolina, thank you so much for coming on. And do you have any final bits before we wrap up?
I'm just really grateful to be here. This was such an inspiring conversation. I really do feel like we need to do this, like even in front of a coffee or somewhere, and then just take notes.
We will. We're going to be friends, right?
Yeah,
that's what I said to you. I was like, I'm just bringing people on the podcast that I just want to be friends with. And this is a great way to do it. So the full episode will be out on our YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, and share, and obviously follow Carolina. All the links are going to be in the captions and comments section. My name is Sonia. This is the LMF Network podcast. Thank you so much for listening and staying in tune.
Thank you. Bye.
You can learn more about the podcast, get involved, and listen via our website, www.lmfnetwork.com. You can follow us across all socials at LMF Network. Remember to like, subscribe, share, and tell a friend. Get involved and drop us your comments or questions so that we can make sure that it's really adding value to your lives.